Okay, so that's going to open up the Pathfinder for me. So here's the Pathfinder. Okay, and I'm going to move it towards my artboard. And I'm also going to zoom in a little bit and focus on the third artboard. That's the one that I want to work on. Okay, and I'm just going to frame it a little bit better than that. Okay, there we go. I'm on the third artboard. And I'm going to draw this sort of Mickey Mouse character. Now, a lot of cartoons or characters are drawn using primitives for the sake of simplicity and the sake of efficiency. So Mickey Mouse, if you look at the profile of his face, he was actually designed to be really simple to draw by just drawing circles. Okay, we just draw a bunch of circles. And so I'm going to go to my primitive, and we looked at the primitives last week, so I'm going to go to the primitives, and here's the primitive for the ellipse. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to draw one ellipse, and I like to draw this character in orange for whatever reason. I'm just used to doing that, I think for the contrast. So I'm going to tear away my swatches. So remember, your swatches show the colors, the default colors. All right, so I'm going to select this object, and I'm going to pick an orangish yellow, and I'm also going to put a black edge around it. I'm going to put a black edge around this. So you know that cartoons, in many cases, have a black edge around them. Is that correct? You guys ever notice how cartoons always have a black edge around them? Yes or no? You guys are so quiet. You guys need to engage with me a little bit more. So I want to make a copy of this. My Mickey Mouse relative has ears like Mickey Mouse, and like I said, Mickey Mouse's head was drawn through primitive. So I'm going to make a couple of copies of this object, and I'm going to scale them down, and you'll notice it's going to start to look like Mickey Mouse ears, correct? I'm going to hold Alt down. Remember, if I hold Alt down, the cursor changes, and this means drag and copy. So that's what I'm going to use. I'm going to use drag and copy, right? So drag and copy. So now I have two ears. Okay, I'm going to let you guys catch up to me, okay? Does anybody need any help or want me to go over something again? Okay, I heard silence. That's crickets. That means everybody's okay. I'll give you a few seconds here to catch up. Cindy, do they look okay? They do? Okay, so she's my eyes behind you. I'm very lucky to have Cindy. Thank you, Cindy. Okay, so I have the general shapes for the mouse head, but I don't want the ears to look like separate objects from the face. I want it to look like one continuous object. So right now it looks like three objects because the ears are overlapping the face area. I want it to be one object. And also, if I open up the layer called Toon, I can see here that it's three objects. I want them to be one object. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select them all. Is your hand up? Were you asking a question? What's up?
The black outline of the circle
Thicker? Okay, so I'm selecting the object. Okay, so up here in my control bar, the first two options that I have, if I hover over this, this is my fill color, and this is my stroke color, and then this is the stroke weight. So if you click up or down on this, it will affect or change the weight of the stroke. Okay? You good? Any other questions before I go to the next step? All right, I don't see a hand up. I'm going to go and move on. Okay, so I'm going to select all of them. Somebody give me a clue. How can I select everything? How can I select everything on this artboard? Okay, let's see what happens when I hit Command A. Well, you'll notice that Command A selected everything. I only want the things on this artboard. So I'm going to click off to deselect. How can I select everything only on this artboard? Drag the cursor around it. Perfect. So I'm going to go to the black arrow, and I'm going to drag around the object, draw a box around the object, and that selects all three circles for me. Okay, I'm going to show you another way that I can select everything in one layer. I can select everything in one layer. So check it out. If I go to the Toon layer, if I click to the right of this circle, it selects that object. See that little circle right there? If I click to the right of it. If I click to the right of this circle, it selects that object. Well, what happens when I click to the right of the circle for the layer name? So this is the layer name. If I click to the right of the circle of the layer name, it selects everything in that layer. Okay, so that's another way that I could have done that. So remember, Illustrator and a lot of the Adobe products have redundancy. There's more than one way to achieve the same thing. So I could have just dragged a box around these, as one of your cohorts said, dragged a box, or I could have clicked out here and accomplished the same thing. Okay. All right, so I want to merge these together. I want to connect them together. And I have to go to the Pathfinder, which I think I accidentally closed. So I'm going to go back to the Pathfinder. I don't see it. Let me see. Oh, there you are, Pathfinder. So there's the Pathfinder. Okay, and if I hover over these, it tells me what it's going to do. So let me zoom in a little bit more. So what does the first one say? Unite. So you'll notice that it looks like it took a shape and connected them together. So I think that's the one that I'm looking for. The two most common features that you will use in the Pathfinder is unite and minus front. Those tend to be the two most common. Okay, so I'm going to drag around all three of these objects, and I'm going to hit the unite button. Keep an eye on the layer panel. Keep an eye on the layer panel. Let's see what happens to the layer panel. When I hit unite, you'll notice that it merged all three circles into one. Let me undo that. Okay, so look, originally they were ellipses. So the ellipse is referencing the shape of the primitive. The ellipse is referencing the shape of the primitive. When I unite them, it's no longer an ellipse. Because it's no longer an ellipse, it's a more complicated shape. It's no longer an ellipse, it's no longer a primitive. It changed its name. What is it calling the shape? What does it say there, everybody? Path. This is, like I said, I asked dumb questions, but I'm really trying to make a point. Okay, there's something that's really valuable here. It's called a path. In fact, all Illustrator shapes are paths. All Illustrator shapes are paths. Even an ellipse has a path around it. But the software knows that it's a primitive, so that's why it's giving it that more specific description. If it's a complicated shape where it's not a primitive, it's going to use the term path instead. If you work in older versions of Illustrator, it called everything a path. It didn't describe a primitive as a separate thing. It didn't understand that it was a primitive onto itself. So everything was called a path. But here you can see that this more complicated shape is called a path. Now, there are two types of paths in Illustrator. There are two types of paths. There are paths that are continuous, that don't have a beginning or an end. They don't have a beginning or an end. And these paths that are continuous are called closed paths. Closed paths. Paths that are not continuous, where you see a beginning or an end, or endpoints, those are called open paths. Okay, so this shape right here, can anybody tell me where the beginning or the end of this path is described? Can you tell? So more than likely, what type of path is this? This is a closed path. This is a closed path, all right? Let me draw a primitive over here. What about this shape right here? Open or closed? Closed. Very good. All right, let's go to this one over here. Open or closed? Closed. These are all closed paths. All of the primitives are closed paths. Very good. Okay, so you'll notice that when I went to the Pathfinder, it merged the shapes together. So now I have this more complex shape. Everybody with me? Everybody here? Okay, what I'm going to do next is I want to cut out eye holes and a mouth. So we're going to cut out eye holes and a mouth. So I'm going to go back to my ellipse, and I'm going to draw a potential eye hole. All right, so see how I drew an eye hole? It's not a hole yet, but I'm going to make a hole out of it. Okay, so I'm going to hold Alt down. Oops. I'm going to hold Alt down and drag this over to the side. Whoops. I didn't do that very well. There we go. So I have two potential eye holes. I'm going to select all of this, and I'm going to select the same feature we used for the donut, which was minus front. So I'm going to click on minus front, and you'll notice it gets rid of the areas where I drew the potential eye holes. All right, so now I'm going to draw a mouth. I'm going to go back to the ellipse. I'm going to draw a little mouth over here. Okay, and I'm going to select all those objects, minus front. Okay, I'm going to give them some teeth. All right, so I'm going to draw a couple of shapes. I'm going to hold Alt down. Hold Alt down, drag. Oops. Hold Alt down, drag. Hold Alt down, drag. Select all of those. Hit Unite. So as you can see here, I can use tools that take away to add more details to this. I can use tools to build onto the surface to create more complexity. So what I'm doing right now is I'm using both additive and subtractive strategies to draw something more complicated. Okay, now the last shape that I'm going to draw, by the way, what tool did I use to draw all of this? What tool did I use to draw all of this? An ellipse. Look at the three objects that I drew. Look at the three objects that I drew. What tool did I use to draw all of them? Ellipses. Everything that you see at this point was constructed from only an ellipse. And the reason that I do this is that I want to prove to you that primitives are really important, and that primitives, if used correctly, can help you illustrate really complicated things, that you shouldn't dismiss the fact that it's just a circle or an ellipse. We can construct far more complicated things by using this object over and over and over again. So if I can draw something this complicated with an ellipse, can you imagine how complex we can get with all of the primitives? Or how complex we can get if I use primitives and some shapes that I draw myself? Then I can draw some really complicated things. So the last thing that I want to do here is I'm going to introduce the first different object. So I'm going to draw a star, and I'm going to put a star over his ear, and I'm going to use minus front. And so this sort of creates this angular cut or tear in his ear.